Hi, this is Astro Indicator Update, and this is Excursions into Practical Astrology. My name is Stephen, and this is Sunday, July 12th, episode 47. So what are we looking at today? We are going to look at Ghislaine Maxwell's astrology, and specifically her transits, and I was curious to see if her transits seem to confirm the mainstream news storyline that we are getting. Then we'll look at the Dow Jones, and in particular maybe a little bit longer term view. We'll also look at its seasonal chart, and then we'll get into the market updates like we usually do. The Dow Jones, gold, a seasonal review as well, silver, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the US dollar. So here's Ghislaine Maxwell's chart. If you're unfamiliar with astrology, this is her natal chart in the middle here, and I've positioned the current position of the planets in the outer ring, and the date for the outer transits, I believe, was the date that she was taken into custody about a week ago. Now, I don't know her birth time, so we can't tell where the planets are in relation to the houses. So there's a big piece of information missing here, but we can get some idea of what, how the transiting planets were aspecting her natal planets. So she was born December 25th, 1961 in France. She is a Capricorn, conjunct Mars, conjunct Venus, Moon in Leo. Okay, now in past videos I've talked about how this planet, if it's closely aligned with the Sun, the planet that is leading the Sun on the day that they were born, is emphasized. In this case, she has a strong Mars in her natal chart, conjunct Venus. Now, it's not true for everyone, but knowing her history, this is a chart of someone who tends to sexualize their relationships and identifies with that to a great extent because the Sun is positioned there. Moon in Leo, again, because we know a little bit about her, this is someone who felt like she was pretty special, kind of maybe royalty in some respect, like to play a lot of time, play most of the time. And so she had sort of a perfect moon position for someone who wanted to be a socialite. So what's going on that day that she was taken into custody? Well, on that particular day, we have Mars. Mars was squaring that conjunction up there. In addition, Mercury was opposite that conjunction by transit, and so we had an extra emphasis on Mars because Mercury and Mars were square. So she was, I think, forcefully, which is a Mars word, forcefully taken, into custody by law enforcement of some fashion, when Mars deals with the military and the police and deals with the body. Her body was, taken somewhere against her will, 90 degrees square. This was not something she was probably cooperating with, but to a great extent, in my estimation. So that's kind of a strong clue that what went on, is what the story, how the story aligns with the story. In addition, by transit, we have Saturn and Pluto are conjunct her Saturn. Okay, well, this is just the antithesis, well, not the antithesis, is just the peak of feeling oppressed, of feeling restricted, of feeling negative, and so forth. And so, this really seems to reflect what is going on in her chart, because this aspect is continuing. So this would be perfect for someone who's in jail or is in prison or is in custody. And so, this is a very stressful, hard time in her life. On top of that, we have transiting Uranus, which is right down here, is squaring that Leo moon. And so, and this could be interpreted a number of ways, but just on the surface, because she's in jail, I think she has a really strong urge to be free. And so this could tie into the idea of her cooperating. She may have been cooperating prior to her arrest in some fashion. Even the fact that she was in the U.S. is a little suspect, because she could have stayed in France, because I don't think France has extradition laws or something along that line. So, this urge for freedom, maybe she was just tired of hiding out, because this transit had been going on for a few months, let's say, and it was maybe building up, and so there could have been some cooperation involved here in order to reduce her sentence, etc., because she has this ongoing urge to, rebel and to get out of, the restrictive situation that she was in. So all in all, I would say that her transits really do match up with kind of the storyline that we have. She may have been cooperating in the interest of longer-term freedom, but her arrest did appear to be, she was maybe taken by surprise. In addition, that Uranus energy could have represented that. But the Mars square to her sun, to me, kind of tips off that the military, the police, were definitely involved in her capture. So anyway, for what that's worth, I was just curious to take a look at that. So let's move on. Let's look at some markets here. This is a typical pattern for the Dow Jones Industrials over a year's period of time, looking back 40 years. This is an unusual year with a pandemic, with the Fed stimulating the markets, etc. But the seasonals do, factor in to a certain extent. And typically, from May all the way through August, the Dow Jones really isn't moving higher or lower. It's usually trading sideways. And then we get into September and October, and even more, going back, 80 years, I think, those have been the weakest months in the Dow. Well, we're going to keep this pattern in mind when we look at some of the astrology related to the Dow in just a second. So here's the Dow Jones Industrials chart, and if you haven't looked at my other videos, I combine astrology with the technicals. The astrology are indicated by, or is indicated by, the vertical lines here. Recently, I'm starting to point out extra kind of strong bullish energy. I try to limit how much of the astrology I put in there. It gets too complicated if I get carried away. But what's going on here? Well, we had the big dip with the shutdown of the economy, affected all markets. You could just throw the astrology out the window. That was going to, the fundamentals in play during February, March were just so strong. Everybody was selling everything. So, but we're getting a little bit where the astrology is somewhat of a factor, even though the Fed, its money stimulus is one of the primary elements you have to take into consideration here. Well, we do have sort of a sideways trending upwards channel taking place. We do not have a lot of strong astrology in the immediate future. We have broken out of this trend line, but we didn't get a big bounce of it. That doesn't surprise me, because the astrology isn't very strong. So what's coming up? Well, we're not too far away from those weak months in the seasonals, and that they could enter the picture here. We'll have to see. But from my understanding, the Federal Reserve is reducing their balance sheet, and they're putting less money into the banking repo system, which they started way back in September. Because I won't get into the whole thing, but the whole banking system was really shaky long before the virus, okay? But that stimulus is going down. So when people wake up to this fact, if indeed it's true from what I've read, then the Fed really isn't increasing their stimulus. They're not as supportive as they have been. So we'll see what happens. It may start entering into the price structure here. So what's going on longer term for the Dow Jones Industrials? Not much. There's a lot of secondary astrology I could be drawing in here, and I will. But when you look way ahead, what are the strongest dates over the next 6 months? Well, they are October 5th and December 14th. And as we were looking just a second ago at the seasonals, October is usually a very weak month. Now, my guess, my forecast, speculation here would be we could start trending down, okay? Look at these support and resistance areas if that indeed happens. When we get close to October 5th, I would expect a bounce, particularly if this market has been trending down. So that rise in the market may come earlier than the seasonals might suggest. And this is the advantage of having some astrology to work with, to incorporate, to integrate into your analysis. So I see some, a bounce in October, but in general, the astrology is not strong in this market. So it's relying on the Fed to a great degree. So tracking what the Fed is doing is very important. Now, some people who are chart readers and, very experienced in technical analysis, they see this market, continuing higher and higher and higher. Well, it just doesn't add up to me. I've been wrong before with this market, but it's mostly because of the influence of the Federal Reserve. So, zero in on what they're doing, and then, play off of the technicals in the astrology as well. So let's move on. This is the gold seasonal chart. Thank you, Zeal LLC. And you see here's June down here and July, and we're mid-July, and normally the market isn't doing a lot in these months. Just from the seasonals, there's a little peak in mid-July and then a pullback, and then we get into August and September that are fairly strong months for gold, as is November and January. So keep that in mind, because let's look at the astrology in gold here. So this is similar setup, astrology, vertical lines. Everything else is kind of traditional technical analysis. Well, we've had a big run-up, and we will continue having a very bullish market in general, because I see the next 6-8 months being strong. However, when you get down into the momentum indicators at every level, weekly, daily, monthly, we are getting into overbought territory. Not quite so much in the MACD, the MACD down here. We're still kind of neutral. Well, this is interesting. We're hitting an interesting point, because we have several, which I didn't all draw in here. It gets too messy. We have several strong astrology dates this week, starting, Monday, Tuesday, and, going to the 17th, which is 14th, which is Friday. And so we'll have to see. Normally what happens when you look at strong astrology is that when it happens at a low oversold area, you get a larger reaction, okay? Fairly oversold, you get a big pop. Now, what will happen this week, my bias here, and this is not trading advice, this is just sharing information, is that I really think we will get a pop this week, but it will be somewhat muted because of the fact that we're overbought. And we may come up to this next resistance level. Now, in cycle analysis within the technical analytical framework, every now and then we find things that are called inversions, where the cycle indicates a rally and you get a pullback. They are rare, but this does happen with the astrology sometimes, where you do, high energy period, but it's in the opposite direction that you think it's going to go. Well, I guess there's a slim chance that that could happen here, but overall, when you look at the longer term astrology cycles relative to gold, they are very strong for a number of months more. So if we do get a pullback, I think it's going to be a short-lived one. Possibly it might only come back down to that trend line right there. I think it's more likely, looking at the silver chart, which we will look at just very soon here. I think we'll get a little pop higher and then maybe a pullback from a higher level. Okay, that's where I'm leaning. Again, a number of ways to play this. If you're a trader, you could have tight stops here, or sell a small portion of your position, etc., etc. So, but the astrology is strong this week. Keep that in mind. So here's the silver chart. It too has some strong astro dates coming up, this week and next week, early next week. So, this market is trending up. In the longer term charts, it's not as overbought. I see this potentially, if we break above this resistance zone right there, the silver chart could go much higher over the next 10 days or so. And you can look back. This was, again, a strong date with the momentum indicators not overbought, so we got a big reaction here. This was an outlier because of, I attribute it as being an anomaly, an outlier, because of the pandemic and people just sold everything here. So, again, the dates, what are the dates here? Sometimes they get overlapped at the bottom. Let me look really quickly for silver in my notes. January 20th. January 20th, the 23rd, and then even into August we have some things, but I'll get into that next week. And I have a new website, which I'll talk about, and you can go to my website in a few days. It's not public yet, but you can get the dates very quickly off my new website. Okay, Bitcoin. What's been going on with Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin has just been in the sort of the doldrums, trading in a sideways channel, while some altcoins have gone up 100% plus. Well, I think this is going to change, and this is going to change next week. At least that's where I'm leaning. Bitcoin is struggling to stay above the 50-day moving average. Here's a trend line they're fairly important trend lines right here, that it's at sort of a juncture point. I think we have a lot of support underneath there, though. I think we could just continue trading sideways until next week. That may be the best scenario for Bitcoin, is to trade sideways, because I think next week we're going to break out of this and see some real movement. A lot of volatility could be involved, up and down, but in general, I think this overall trend will continue higher. So mark your calendars then and there. If I was going to be real specific, I would look at, the 21st and 22nd, July 25th, and so forth. Okay, here's Ethereum. It's a little bit stronger than Bitcoin. It is above, the 50-day moving average, but it too generally is, it hasn't really gone anywhere for a couple months. And when you get a breakout from a pattern like this, usually it's a strong breakout. But we're looking, further ahead, like out to the 28th, when Ethereum has a stronger market or stronger astrology. And finally, the US dollar. It's a tough one to call because the dollar is influenced by the demand for dollars around the world. And when there's a lot of debt in the world and people are being forced to, make payments and pay that debt in U.S. dollars, they need more U.S. dollars. And so even though there's much more money having been printed, currency having been printed around the world, which should dilute the value of these currencies, including the USD, there is a demand for it because of the debt levels, and that's been keeping this market up. There was a big tell, though, in this market a few weeks ago, and it's right where I have my cursor. And that should have been a bounce off of that support level, and it wasn't. It broke down. To me, it was like astrology news, and the way that this market responded to that news was weakness. And so this was a big telling indicator that the dollar's starting to slip. Now we're also at a critical point right now where we've dipped below this trend line, at least how I draw trend lines. And this support area is now into play, which is probably the more important one. It looks like we're trying to bounce off of that support level. If we go through it this week, there's not a lot of astrology up until the 20th, which is a week from Monday, where I think we could get a bounce. So very likely I'm leaning to the idea that we could break down and then get a bounce back test next week. So that's it for today. My name is Stephen. I've been researching financial astrology. A lot of these things I've kind of developed on my own with some definite influence from other researchers. Master's degree in psychology. I think gold and silver and cryptocurrencies are things to look at. This is my email. If you have a question, in a few days I'm going to have a new website that will be going public, and you could get the dates more quickly. It will also have my video on the website, the weekly video. I accept Bitcoin. How about that? And thank you for listening. If you want to be notified of when I do publish these videos, consider subscribing, and please hit the like button and all that good stuff. But, thanks again, and I'll probably be back in a week on Sunday. Bye for now.